The afternoon sun was still hanging in the sky when the girl stepped out of the small rental room she shared with her mother. The building was old, the paint on the walls fading, and the stairs creaked every time someone walked on them. She tightened her grip on the thin strap of her bag. Inside, it was the invitation that had arrived 3 days ago, a letter she had read over and over. Trying to understand why it had been sent to someone like her, she came from a quiet corner of the city where most people were too busy trying to make ends meet to think about big dreams. Her mother spent long hours stitching clothes for small shops, and the girl did whatever part-time work she could find. Sometimes she delivered groceries, sometimes she helped at a nearby bakery, and sometimes she cleaned tables at a roadside stall. Every little bit helped. It had always been like that for as long as she remembered, but there was one thing that made her different from the people around her. She could play the piano. Not on a new one, not on something shiny or fancy. The piano she learned on was an old keyboard a neighbor had given away. Some of the keys didn't work, and there was a constant humming sound whenever it was plugged in, but she cherished it with all her heart. Whenever she played, she felt like she could breathe again. Even on the hardest days, the invitation she received was for a glamorous event, a gala filled with some of the richest and most influential people in the city. She had no idea how her name got on the list. The charity that organized the event sometimes chose people from underprivileged areas to highlight hidden talent, and maybe someone had recommended her. She didn't know. She only knew that this chance felt too big to ignore. Still, as she walked through the crowded streets toward the bus stop, she kept wondering if she was doing the right thing. The dress she wore was the best she had, but even that was simple. She had ironed it carefully the night before, hoping it would help her feel a little more confident. Her shoes were old but clean, and her hair was tied back neatly. She wanted to look presentable, even if she couldn't look anything like the people she was about to meet. When she got on the bus, she sat by the window and watched the world passing by. The city was noisy and full of life, but her thoughts were louder. She kept telling herself that she was only going to observe. She wasn't required to perform. She didn't have to impress anyone. She just needed to show up and see what happened. But deep inside, she knew she was hoping for something. Maybe an opportunity. Maybe a moment of luck. Maybe just a chance to be seen. As the bus moved closer to the center of the city, the buildings began to change. Small shops turned into tall glass towers. Old markets turned into clean, wide roads lined with expensive cars. People walking on the sidewalks wore clothes that made them look like they had stepped out of a magazine. The girl felt smaller with every passing block, like she was drifting into a world she didn't belong in. When she got off the bus, she stood in front of the gala venue, a grand hall decorated with lights that shimmered even in the daytime. The entrance was wide, with red carpets laid out and guards standing tall on each side. Guests were arriving one after another, stepping out of luxurious cars. Their outfits sparkled, their shoes shined, and their confidence made them look even taller. She took a deep breath and walked toward the line of guests. For a moment, she hesitated. Her feet felt heavy, as if the ground was holding her back. She looked down at her dress again, then at the people around her. They didn't look at her, but she could feel the difference between them and her like a wall she couldn't climb. Still, she took the next step. Then another dot. When she reached the registration desk, she handed over her invitation. The woman at the table looked at her, then at the paper, then back at her again. It wasn't a rude look, but it was a curious one, as if she wasn't sure how someone like the girl had come to be there. "Welcome. Please enjoy your evening," the woman said politely. Though her tone sounded practiced. The girl nodded and stepped inside. The hall was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, filling the room with warm, golden light. Tables were decorated with tall flower arrangements and sparkling glasses. A soft melody played in the background, the kind that instantly made a person feel calm. But she couldn't relax. She felt like a small leaf drifting into a storm. Guests moved around the hall as if they belonged there, chatting and laughing with ease. Men in suits and women in elegant gowns filled the space with confidence. Waiters walked around carrying trays of drinks, and every corner of the room seemed perfect. As she stepped deeper into the hall, she noticed a few people glancing at her. Their gazes moved quickly from her dress to her shoes and then away again. It wasn't loud judgment, but it was enough to make her heart beat a little faster. She found a quiet corner near the wall and stood there, trying to blend in. She watched everything carefully. She studied the way people talked, the way they carried themselves, the way they smiled with such certainty. She wondered what it must feel like to live without worrying about money, about food, about bills. For a moment, she felt like she had made a mistake coming here, but then she remembered her mother's words from that morning. Go and see what the world looks like outside our little street. Even if nothing happens, you'll learn something. And who knows? Maybe life has something planned for you. Those words gave her strength. Then her attention drifted toward the stage at the front of the hall. A grand piano stood there, black, polished, smooth, shining under the golden lights. It was the kind of piano she had only ever seen in pictures. She couldn't help but stare at it. Her heart ached a little. She imagined what it would feel like to press those keys, to hear the deep, rich sound echo through the hall. She imagined playing one of the melodies she had practiced late at night on her old keyboard. She imagined people listening, really listening, but she quickly shook the thought away. This was not her place. This was not her stage. A group of well-dressed young people nearby had also noticed her. Their whispers weren't loud, but the tone carried a hint of amusement. One of them laughed softly, covering it with a fake cough. Another raised an eyebrow, clearly curious about why she was there at all. The girl pretended not to notice, but she felt their eyes on her. She pulled her hands together, holding them tight so they wouldn't shake. She began walking around the hall slowly, trying to distract herself by looking at the art displays and creative decorations. Every detail of the gala looked expensive. Everything felt so far away from her world. Still, she reminded herself that she had earned this invitation somehow. Even if she didn't know why, she was here for a reason. She just needed to stay strong. She eventually found a table with small snacks and picked up one quietly. She hadn't eaten much before coming, but now she was too nervous to feel hungry. She took a small bite anyway, hoping it would calm her racing thoughts. Time passed slowly, and she remained mostly alone. No one approached her, and she didn't approach anyone. But she kept observing. She wanted to take in everything, the way opportunities looked, the way success moved, the way dreams existed in a room like this. When the host stepped onto the stage, the hall grew quiet. He welcomed everyone warmly and spoke about the purpose of the event, celebrating hidden talents and supporting young individuals who rarely got a chance to show what they could do. His words made the girl's heart tremble with a strange mix of hope and fear. If people like her were meant to be here, maybe she wasn't as out of place as she thought. But even then, she did not imagine that the night ahead would change her life in ways she couldn't even dream of. The girl stayed near the side of the hall, even after the host finished speaking. His words made her feel a little lighter, but she still couldn't shake the sense that she did not belong among people who seemed so sure of their own worth. She watched as guests clapped politely and then returned to their conversations, their voices mixing into a steady hum. She kept her eyes on the floor, hoping that would help her blend in. But she knew it didn't. Everything about her looked different. Her dress, her shoes, even the way she stood. Unsure of where her hands should be, or how she should hold herself. A waiter passed by with a tray of drinks. She quietly took a glass of juice and murmured a soft thank you. The waiter gave her a small smile, one of the first friendly gestures she had seen since she'd arrived. It made her shoulders relax just a little dot. As she sipped her drink, she took a moment to study the room again. The hall was brighter now, filled with more guests than before. Laughter rose from different corners. A group of business people stood near a tall display of artwork, discussing something with serious expressions. A line of photographers waited near the entrance, taking pictures of people who wanted their moment captured against the shimmering backdrop. She wondered if anyone here would notice her for something more than the way she looked. Not long after, the first performance of the evening was announced. A well-known violinist walked up to the stage with confident steps. The girl moved a little closer so she could see better, but she stayed behind the crowd to avoid drawing attention. The violinist's performance was smooth and polished. Every note sounded perfect, filling the hall with a bright, sharp beauty. The audience applauded loudly when it ended, and the violinist walked away with a graceful smile. Several more performers followed: singers, dancers, even a magician. Each one seemed talented, trained, prepared. The girl watched them with admiration, but also with a growing heaviness in her chest. These people looked like they had been practicing in proper studios, with real teachers, real instruments, real support. What did she have? A broken keyboard and a few hours of practice squeezed in between work. Still, something inside her refused to let go of hope. After a while, she walked toward the refreshment area again. She reached for a small plate when she heard soft laughter behind her. At first, she ignored it. Laughter could mean anything. But then she heard a whisper, low but clear. Who invited her? She looks like she walked in from a different event. Another voice followed, amused. Maybe she's here to serve, not attend. Her cheeks burned instantly. She kept her eyes on the table, pretending she hadn't heard them. She held her breath, hoping the people behind her would just walk away, but one of them stepped closer. Isn't this event supposed to be for talented youth? What's her talent? Carrying bags? The girl didn't turn around. She felt the sting of their words, sharp and cold, but she refused to react. She had grown up around people who underestimated her, who thought dreams were useless. She knew how to stay quiet and keep her feelings hidden. Still, she couldn't deny that the comments hurt. She stepped away from the table, moving toward a quieter part of the hall. There she found a seat along the wall and sat down, placing her hands in her lap. She tried to calm herself, taking slow breaths. A few minutes later, an elderly waiter walked past and noticed her sitting alone. He paused and gave her a gentle nod. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She managed a faint smile. "Yes, I'm fine." His eyes showed he didn't fully believe her, but he didn't push. Instead, he said, "This room can be overwhelming, especially when people forget their manners. But don't let it make you feel small." His words surprised her. She looked up at him, meeting his kind eyes. "I feel out of place," she admitted quietly. "You're here," he replied with certainty. "That means you belong here just as much as anyone else." Before she could respond, the waiter was called away by someone else. But his words stayed with her, warming a part of her heart that had been cold since she walked in. She looked toward the stage again. The grand piano still stood under the lights, untouched since the start of the event. It seemed larger now, almost calling to her. She imagined the sound it would make, deep and full, nothing like the uneven tones of her keyboard dot. She had come here with a secret wish, a small one, the kind she didn't dare say out loud. She had hoped that somehow, maybe, she would get a chance to play. But as she looked at the people around her, she wondered if she should push that thought away. Not long after, The host announced a short break before the next set of performances. People began moving around the hall again, talking, drinking, and laughing. The girl stood up slowly and walked toward the piano, stopping a few steps away. She didn't touch it. She just stared at it. As she stood there, she overheard a pair of women talking behind her. That girl again. Why does she keep staring at the piano? Maybe she thinks she can play. The second woman laughed softly. That would be interesting. I doubt she's ever touched a real piano. The girl felt their words hit her like a wave. She turned away quickly, pretending she hadn't heard anything, but her chest felt tight. It was one thing to be ignored. It was another to be laughed at. She walked toward a quieter corner of the hall, close to a window where she could breathe. The outside world looked darker now. Evening had finally settled. The city lights flickered across the skyline, reminding her of all the nights she practiced while the world slept. Maybe she wasn't as worthless as these people made her feel. She had spent years teaching herself how to play. She had practiced even when her fingers were tired from work. She had memorized melodies from videos, copying each note as best as she could. She had learned everything through patience and determination, not money. But none of that mattered here. Not unless she found the courage to step forward. While she stood by the window, thinking silently, the elderly waiter returned. He seemed to be searching for someone, but when he saw her, he walked over. Still alone? He asked kindly. She nodded. It's quieter here. He looked toward the stage, then back at her. You keep watching that piano. She bit her bottom lip. I like music. That's more than enough, he said with a gentle smile. You know, this event allows open performances. Anyone with courage can go up there. She looked at him with surprise. Anyone? He nodded. Talent doesn't hide forever. Sometimes it only needs a moment to shine. His words made her heart flutter with nervous energy. She wanted to play. She wanted to show what she could do. But the fear inside her was strong. The fear of being laughed at. The fear of failing. The fear of proving everyone right. Still, deep down, there was a small voice whispering that she should try. The waiter placed a form on a nearby table. This is for performers, he explained. Just write your name if you decide to join. He walked away before she could say anything. She stared at the form for a long moment. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for it. Her name looked so small on the paper when she finally wrote it down. When she placed the form in the submission box, she felt a rush of fear sweep through her. What had she just done? What if she embarrassed herself? What if she made a fool of the only chance she'd ever been given? But another part of her felt. Lighter got she had taken a step. She walked back to her corner and waited quietly, her heart beating so loudly she could almost hear it. People around her continued with their conversations, unaware of the storm happening inside her as the break ended. The host returned to the stage and announced that the next segment would include a few surprise performances. The girl felt her stomach twist. She had no idea when. Her turn would be called. She only knew that her life suddenly felt like it was balancing on one small, fragile moment, and there was no turning back now. The next morning arrived with a soft light spreading through the thin curtains of the small room. It was the kind of light that made everything look calmer than it truly was. She sat on the edge of her bed, hands resting on her knees, trying to steady her thoughts. The events of the previous days replayed in her mind like slow-moving scenes from a movie she didn't choose to watch. Nothing about her situation felt simple, but she knew she couldn't stay still forever. She took a deep breath and stood up. Her legs felt heavy, almost unwilling to carry her weight, yet she forced herself to get ready. There was a quiet determination in her heart, one that had slowly grown as she faced challenge after challenge. She wasn't the kind of person to give up, even when life tried to push her into a corner. When she stepped outside, the air was cool and carried a gentle breeze. She walked slowly toward the small cafe where she often went to think. It wasn't far, but every step felt meaningful. This wasn't just a walk. It was a moment for her to gather herself, to remind her heart that she could continue no matter how confusing things became. The cafe was quiet at that hour. Only a few early customers were scattered around, each lost in their own world. She chose a small table near the window. Sitting there always gave her a sense of calm. She ordered her usual cup of tea, something warm and familiar, something that made her feel grounded. As she waited, she watched people pass by outside. Some were walking quickly, perhaps late for work, while others moved slowly, taking their time. She wondered what their stories were. Did they also carry fears and hopes as she did? Were they also pretending to be stronger than they felt? These questions made her feel less alone. When the tea arrived, she wrapped her hands around the warm cup and took a gentle sip. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth travel through her body. It gave her a feeling of comfort that she had been missing for some time. She began thinking about the message she received the night before. It had left her feeling restless, unsure of what direction she should take next. She didn't want to make a mistake, yet she knew that doing nothing was also a choice, and not a good one. After a few moments of silence, she reached into her bag and took out a small notebook. The pages were filled with her thoughts, hopes, and fears, things she couldn't say aloud. She flipped to a blank page and began writing. Her handwriting was simple, soft, almost hesitant. She wrote about her confusion, her worries, and her wish to understand what was happening around her while writing. She didn't notice someone approaching her table until a quiet voice said, "Is this seat taken?" She looked up, surprised. A familiar face stood there, someone she had crossed paths with before, though not very often. She didn't know him well, but she had always felt that he carried a sense of calmness around him. "No, you can sit," she replied politely. He sat down with a gentle smile. "You look deep in thought today." She let out a soft laugh, though it didn't hide her concern. "Just trying to make sense of a few things." He nodded as if he understood perfectly. "Life can get like that sometimes, but you don't have to solve everything at once." His words felt strangely comforting. She didn't know why, but they made her feel seen. She didn't explain her entire situation. She didn't need to. Sometimes, even a small moment of understanding can mean more than a long conversation. They talked for a few minutes, mostly about simple things, the weather, the street outside, the quiet morning. Yet the simplicity of their conversation brought her a small sense of peace. It reminded her that even in chaos, there were moments of gentle normalcy. When he eventually stood up to leave, he said, "Take your time and trust yourself a little more." She watched him walk away, and for a moment she felt lighter. She stayed at the cafe for almost an hour. By the time she stood up to leave, she had made a small but important decision. She would not let fear control her. She would face whatever came next, even if her heart trembled a little. On her way back, she stopped at a small shop to buy a few things she needed. The shopkeeper greeted her warmly, as he always did. His friendliness added another layer of comfort to her day. Once she reached home, she placed her things on the table and sat down again. This time, she felt more centered. She picked up her phone and began typing a message. Her fingers hesitated for a moment, but then she continued. She sent the message with a deep breath. The hours that followed were slow, but she tried to keep herself busy. She cleaned a little, organized her things, and prepared a simple meal. These small tasks helped keep her mind steady. Later in the afternoon, she finally received a reply. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the notification. She read the message carefully, and though it brought new questions, it also gave her clarity. Things were not as complicated as she feared, yet they weren't simple either. She felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. But this time, she didn't feel overwhelmed. She reminded herself again that she didn't need to have all the answers today. What mattered was taking one step at a time. Before the day ended, she went for a short walk outside. The evening air was cooler, and the streetlights had begun to glow softly. She walked without rushing, letting the quiet night help her unwind. As she walked, she thought about how much had changed in such a short time. She wasn't sure where her journey was leading her, but she felt stronger than she did yesterday. Growth often came quietly, without fanfare, and she realized she was growing too. When she returned home, she sat by the window and looked out at the peaceful street. She felt grateful for the small moments in her day, the warm tea, the simple conversation, the gentle breeze. These moments had helped her find a little clarity. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "I'll take it one day at a time." And with that thought, she finally felt ready for whatever part 4 of her journey would bring. The moment her name was added to the list, the girl felt a mix of excitement and fear twisting inside her. She returned to her quiet corner near the wall, but she could no longer focus on anything happening around her. Every sound in the hall felt distant compared to the loud beating of her own heart. Her hands trembled slightly as she held them together. She kept imagining the stage, the grand piano, and the hundreds of eyes that would turn toward her as soon as her name was called. She wondered if she had been too bold. Perhaps she should have waited. Perhaps she wasn't ready. Perhaps she had made a mistake, but the small voice inside her, the one that had pushed her to sign the form, told her that it was too late to back out. And maybe that was a good thing. As the evening program resumed, guests gathered again near the stage. The lights dimmed a little, creating a soft glow through the hall. Performers walked up one by one, singers with calm voices. A young man who played the flute with confidence, a girl who danced gracefully. The audience clapped politely after each one. The girl watched them all. They looked brave. They looked sure of themselves. She wondered if they ever felt scared like she did. The host stood at the center of the stage after one performance ended. He glanced at the sheet of names in his hand. The girl felt her breath catch. Maybe this was it? But the host called someone else. She exhaled slowly, relieved and anxious at the same time. She didn't know when her turn would come, and the waiting was somehow harder than the performing itself. She tried to distract herself by looking around the hall. She noticed the decorations again, the shimmering curtains, the soft golden lights, the elegant floral arrangements. Everything looked expensive and perfect. People seemed relaxed, chatting and laughing without worry. But in her mind, everything was blurry except for the grand piano. She imagined placing her fingers on the cool, smooth keys. She imagined the first note trembling through the hall. She imagined her music filling the space and touching people who had never heard her play before. But she also imagined the opposite, her hands freezing, her notes falling apart. People staring with pity or amusement. Her stomach tightened. As the next performer finished, the host returned again. This time, his eyes lingered on the list for longer than before. He smiled slightly. "We have a special addition to tonight's performances," he said. "A young participant who signed up during the break. Please give a warm welcome to." The girl closed her eyes. "Our next performer." The moment her name echoed through the hall, her whole body went still. It felt strange, hearing her name spoken in a room like this. She wasn't used to being recognized. She wasn't used to being called forward for anything important. Her legs felt weak as she stood up. For a second, she thought she might fall. But then she reminded herself why she was here. She reminded herself of all the nights she had practiced alone. All the time she dreamed of a real stage. All the moments she wished She could share her music with the world. She took a small step, then another. The hall grew quieter as she walked toward the stage. People looked at her with curious expressions. Some looked surprised. Some whispered. A few seemed amused. But she didn't let herself look at them for long. Instead, she focused on the piano. When she reached the steps leading to the stage, she hesitated again. The lights looked brighter now, almost blinding. The room felt huge, too huge for someone like her, but she forced herself to walk up the steps. The host gave her a gentle nod, as if encouraging her. She returned a small nod before moving toward the piano, the soft clicking of her shoes against the wooden stag. I will share part 4 of the story in simple and natural English, keeping it human-centric, engaging, and safe for YouTube. No disallowed names are used. Here's part 4. As the days passed, he kept thinking about everything that had happened ever since he took that first step into the unknown. Life had changed so quickly that sometimes he would sit alone and wonder how a single decision could shape so many things at once. But even with all the challenges, he felt something new growing inside him, a quiet strength he never knew he had. He woke up early one morning, long before the sun came up. The air was cool and still, and the small room around him was filled with silence. For a moment, he just sat on the edge of his bed, looking down at his hands as if searching for answers in the lines on his palms. He could feel the weight of the past few weeks, but he also felt a strange calm, like he was learning how to carry that weight without letting it crush him. After washing his face, he stepped outside. The sky was slowly turning light blue. Birds were beginning to move on the branches, shaking off the night. He took a deep breath and started walking toward the main road. Every morning walk had become a kind of therapy for him. It was during these walks that he allowed his thoughts to settle. He passed by the small shops that were still closed. Metal shutters were pulled down, and the street was almost empty. But he liked this quiet version of the city. It made him feel like he had the world to himself for a few minutes, before everything started rushing again. As he reached the tea stall near the corner, the owner was just lighting the stove. "You're early today," the man said with a warm smile. He smiled back and nodded. "Couldn't sleep much." The man poured tea into a steel cup and handed it to him. The warm cup felt comforting in his hands. He leaned against the wooden counter and watched the steam rise from the cup. "You know," the stall owner said casually, "sometimes waking up early is a sign that your mind is working on something important." He didn't reply immediately. He just took a slow sip and felt the heat spread through his body. Maybe the man was right. Maybe his mind was indeed trying to make sense of everything. After finishing his tea, he continued walking. The road became busier with each passing minute. Rickshaws, bikes, and early workers began filling the space. But even among all this noise, his thoughts stayed focused. He had promised himself something a few days ago. He would not run away again. No matter how difficult things became, he would face them. He wanted to prove to himself that he could stand strong. Later that day, he reached the small workshop where he had recently started working. The place wasn't fancy, but it had given him a chance when he needed it most. The owner, an older man with a kind face, greeted him with a nod. "You're early again," the man said. "Just wanted to get a head start," he replied. He began organizing tools, adjusting the wooden shelves, and preparing the workspace. The tasks were simple, but he did them with full attention. Every small responsibility felt meaningful now. While working, he noticed the older man watching him. "You've changed," the man said. "When you first came here, you looked lost, but now you look more sure of yourself." He felt a small smile form on his face. "I still have a long way to go." "We all do," the man replied. "But recognizing that is the first step." The rest of the morning passed quickly. He worked quietly, focused on learning as much as he could. Each mistake taught him something new, and each new skill boosted his confidence. Around noon, he took a break outside. Sitting under a tree, he watched people walk by, some laughing, some rushing, some lost in their own thoughts. It made him realize that everyone carried something inside them, even when they didn't show it. He thought about the people who had supported him recently. They weren't many, but they were enough. Their kindness had kept him moving forward. It reminded him that even small acts of support could change someone's entire path. In the afternoon, the clouds grew darker, and a gentle rain began to fall. He hurried to close the shop's windows. As the rain hit the ground, the air cooled and the smell of wet soil filled the workshop. The older man stepped beside him and said, "There will be storms in life too. But storms don't last. And when they pass, the air always feels fresh." He nodded slowly. "I'm starting to understand that." When the rain stopped, the sun broke through the clouds, and everything looked new again. The rooftops sparkled with drops of water, and the trees swayed gently in the breeze. Before going home, he stood outside for a moment, watching the sky. Deep inside, he felt settled, even if only for a moment. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he felt like he was moving in the right direction. And sometimes, that was enough. As he walked back through the busy streets, he thought about what tomorrow might bring. There would be challenges, of course, but also hope. And for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The morning light slipped quietly into her room, touching the edges of the walls with a gentle glow. She opened her eyes slowly, feeling the weight of the last few days still sitting softly on her chest. She didn't feel tired anymore, but she didn't feel completely rested either. It was something in between, a space where her thoughts floated calmly instead of racing. She took a moment before sitting up, letting her mind adjust to the new day. Her small room looked the same as always, yet something inside her felt different. Maybe it was the conversation she had the day before, the honesty that had opened a window inside her heart. Maybe it was the message she had received earlier, the one that helped her understand things she had been afraid to face. Whatever it was, she felt a quiet shift happening within her. She finally got out of bed and went to wash her face. The cold water woke her fully, making her feel more present. She stared at herself in the mirror. Her eyes still showed a bit of uncertainty, but there was a new softness too, a calm she hadn't felt in a while. She got dressed slowly, choosing something simple and neat. She tied her hair back, smoothing it with her fingers. She didn't want to rush. Today felt like a day she needed to move through gently, step by step. In the kitchen, she warmed water and made tea. The steam rose in slow spirals, and she wrapped both hands around the cup as though the warmth could steady her thoughts. She sipped quietly, letting the tea settle her. Her mind drifted back to the previous day, to the words she heard and the questions she had finally asked. Nothing had been easy, but truth rarely is. Yet there was comfort in knowing she wasn't walking through everything alone. After finishing her tea, she stepped outside. The air greeted her with a soft chill, the kind that wakes you up fully but doesn't bite. The street was peaceful, shops slowly opening, people passing with sleepy expressions, the sky painted in pale colors. She didn't have a destination at first. She just walked, her thoughts moving at the same pace as her footsteps. But soon, without fully realizing it, she was heading toward a quiet place she'd always found comforting. The park. She entered through the small metal gate and followed the curved path lined with old trees. Their branches swayed lightly in the morning breeze, leaves whispering in soft patterns. She found a bench under one of the larger trees and sat down. She breathed in deeply, letting the calm around her sink in. Birds hopped around the grass, and the small pond nearby reflected the sky like a glass surface. Moments like these reminded her that the world still held softness. Even when life felt heavy, she closed her eyes for a few seconds and listened to the wind, to the distant sound of footsteps, to her own heartbeat. After sitting in silence for a while, she reached into her bag and pulled out her small notebook. She had always written her thoughts down, not because she wanted to be a writer, but because it helped her understand herself. She opened to a fresh page and began writing slowly. She wrote about the truth she learned, the things that scared her, the things that made her hopeful. She wrote about the piano, the way it had unexpectedly brought her into a world she had never imagined entering. She wrote about her fears of not fitting in, and about the strange strength she felt growing inside her. Her handwriting wavered in a few places, but she didn't stop. She let the words pour out, gentle and honest. When she finally stopped writing, she closed the notebook and placed it softly back into her bag. She leaned back against the bench and looked up at the sky. The pale blue had deepened. The day was moving forward. Her phone buzzed suddenly inside her bag. She reached for it, her heart skipping slightly. It was another message. She read it slowly. The words were clear, thoughtful, and sincere. They explained the next steps, the possibilities ahead, and the support she didn't realize she had. It wasn't a promise of something perfect, but it was a sign that she wasn't being forgotten. She wasn't being left behind. A soft breath left her. She felt something warm inside her chest. She knew she needed to respond. She typed carefully, choosing simple and honest words, and then sent the message before she could overthink it. With her heart a little steadier, she stood up from the bench and brushed off her dress. She walked out of the park and headed toward a building she had passed many times, but never entered until recently. When she reached it, she hesitated in front of the door. For a moment, doubt crept into her mind. But she closed her eyes, took a slow breath, and pushed the door open. Inside, the hallway felt familiar now. She followed it to the room she was supposed to meet in. The morning of the final moment arrived with a quiet stillness, the kind that wrapped softly around her thoughts and made everything feel both heavy and calm at the same time. She woke before her alarm, her eyes opening gently as the faint light of dawn touched the edge of the room. For a long moment, she didn't move. She simply lay there, listening to her own breathing, feeling the gentle rise and fall of her chest. This was the day she had been unknowingly walking toward from the very beginning, the day that would bring everything full circle. Yet she didn't feel the fear she expected. Instead, she felt a strange mixture of peace and anticipation, as if life had quietly prepared her for this moment while she wasn't looking. She finally sat up, brushing her hair away from her face. The room was silent, except for the faint sound of birds beginning to stir outside. She looked around at the small space she called home. It wasn't big or fancy, but it held her memories, her struggles, and her quiet victories. She ran her hand along the soft blanket beside her and smiled lightly. Everything in this room had been part of her journey. She got ready slowly, taking her time with every small step. She washed her face, tied her hair back neatly, and chose a simple dress that made her feel comfortable. She didn't want anything loud or dramatic. She wanted to feel like herself. In the kitchen, she boiled water for tea, watching the steam rise in soft curls. She poured it into a cup and held it gently between her hands. The warmth traveled into her palms, grounding her. She took a slow sip and let the heat settle inside her. Today wasn't about proving anything. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about showing up for herself. After finishing her tea, she grabbed her small bag and stepped outside. The sky was a gentle shade of blue, touched by warm light. The streets were waking up one by one, people opening their shops, children walking to school, cars passing with sleepy drivers. She walked toward the grand hall where her journey had unexpectedly begun. She had been there before, but today felt different. This time, she wasn't entering as a lost girl searching for a place to belong. Today, she was walking in as someone who had grown, learned, and found strength she didn't know she had by the time she reached the entrance of the hall. Her heart was beating a little faster, though not from fear. She paused for a moment to take it all in. The tall glass doors, the elegant walls, the faint hum of activity inside. It all felt familiar now. As she stepped inside, she noticed people moving around with purpose, preparing for an important event. She didn't know many of them, but some recognized her. A few smiled politely. Others nodded in greeting. And she, in return, offered a soft smile. She walked down the long hallway until she reached a room she had been invited to earlier. The door was slightly open, and gentle music floated out from inside. She pushed the door open quietly. There, in the center of the room, stood the grand piano, the same one that had changed her life on the night of the gala. Seeing it again brought back a rush of memories. She remembered standing here with trembling hands, remembering how she had taken a deep breath before touching the keys, and how the entire room had fallen silent as her music filled the air. She approached the piano slowly, her fingers brushing the polished surface. She sat down on the bench, feeling the familiar weight beneath her. Her hands rested gently on her lap as she closed her eyes. She took a long breath. When she opened her eyes again, she placed her fingers lightly on the keys. The touch felt warm, like greeting an old friend. She didn't begin playing right away. She simply breathed, letting the moment settle. Then she played not with fear, not with doubt, but with calm confidence that came from everything she had endured to reach this point. The music rose softly, filling the quiet room with gentle notes. It wasn't a performance for applause. It wasn't for anyone's approval. It was a private moment, a conversation between her heart and the instrument that had given her a voice when words weren't enough. As she played, memories drifted through her mind, the struggles, the small victories, the nights she stayed up practicing because music was the only thing that made her feel alive. Every note she played held a piece of her story. When she finally let the last note fade, she lifted her hands slowly from the keys. A deep, peaceful breath escaped her lips. She stayed seated for a few moments, letting the quiet fill the space again. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to see one of the event organizers standing there with a gentle smile. "They're ready for you," the person said softly. She nodded. She stood up, smoothed her dress, and followed them down the hallway. With each step, she felt a steady sense of confidence growing inside her, stronger and clearer than anything she had felt before. At the entrance to the main hall, she paused again. The large room was filled with people, many she didn't know, some she recognized. They were talking quietly among themselves, unaware of her arrival. Then, as she stepped forward, someone noticed her. The quiet conversation slowly faded, and soon the entire hall turned its attention toward her. The room fell silent, just as it had the first time she walked in, but this silence felt different. It wasn't the silence of judgment. It was the silence of respect. She walked to the center of the stage, her steps steady, her heart calm. The grand piano stood waiting, its surface catching the soft glow of the lights. She sat down once more. The hall was quiet. Every eye was on her. But she didn't feel overwhelmed. She felt ready. She placed her fingers on the keys, and she played. The music grew around her, rising and falling like waves. It carried her story, everything she had been through, into the room. The notes floated through the air with clarity and grace, touching the hearts of the people listening. Some leaned forward, others closed their eyes. The sound moved through the hall like warm light, filling every corner, and she, for the first time, felt truly seen, not for her struggles, not for her mistakes, but for the strength she carried within. When the final note lingered and faded, the hall stayed silent for one breath. Then the applause began. It wasn't loud and wild. It was warm, steady, and sincere, like the sound of people honoring someone who had walked a long road with quiet courage. She stood slowly, her heart swelling with a soft, overwhelming emotion. She bowed gently. As she lifted her head again, she realized something. She wasn't the needy girl who had once walked into this place, unsure of where she belonged. She was someone who had found her own path, someone who had learned that strength often grows in silence, someone who finally understood her own worth. And as she stepped away from the piano, she knew that whatever came next, she was ready to face it.